Here we are.
There we are.
Thank
Okay.
you all so much for your patience. My name is Jen. I work at Two Rivers Books and Weird Sisters Yarn, and I have with me tonight Kate Kaufmann, author of Do You Have Children? Life When the Answer is No, and Jackie Shannon Hollis, who wrote this particular Happiness, a childless love story.
Oh, is it backwards?
There you go. We are kind of new to Crowdcast and the technology, so thank you for hanging in with us while we figured out some technical details. We apologize in advance if anything else goes sideways here. If you have questions, by all means, feel free to ask them. There's an Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. We also have a poll question that we would like to get feedback on, just so that we know who we're talking to tonight. With that, I think I'm going to hand it over.
Great.
All righty. Well, I think I was going to do some kickoff here. And what I am noticing is that on the poll, 75% of us don't have children and 25% do. And I ask that question whenever I get groups of people together, particularly, I mean, I love that we have some parents and non-parents, a mix. And what I would like to ask you to notice is if you're in the 75%, what that feels like, because it's going to be a rare time that you'll be in the majority. And if you're in the 25%, really let that sink in that you are not the majority, and it's a completely different experience. And so we're going to tilt this conversation towards the not having children because there's not so many of us and we don't have an easy way to have a conversation about it. So Jackie and I we know each other, and we know each other through not having kids and our books. So we thought we would kick off. We'll each read a tiny bit from our book, gives you a flavor of what we're up to and why. And then we'll have a few questions that we'll go through, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So I'm going to show you the reverse again. So if you can get a mirror, and then you'll see what it is. It's oh God, nasty looking. Do you have kids? Life when the answer is no. And I'm going to read from the very beginning because it tells you how this came to be. A new friend and I walk along a near deserted beach, kicking sand, talking as women do when getting better acquainted. I inhale, then pose the question I always dread hearing and never ask, simply to get it over with. Do you have kids? No, I don't, she answers. You? No. We stroll in silence for a while. I've wanted to talk about life without kids for a long time, so I ask if she's okay discussing the subject, and she is. We talk about how we define our lives, what matters to us, how we are different than our sisters and friends with children of their own. Neither of us has ever talked like this before. As the years pass, our friendship grows and we keep talking. Every once in a while, we host small gatherings of women who likewise don't have kids. We talk about how our lives are impacted in many ways by the absence of offspring, including health, spirituality, and how we define family, money, end-of-life planning, and how we spend the holidays. Some of us failed to conceive. Others opted out or chose not to risk passing on genetic conditions. Bottom line, no one has sprung from our loins. That's not bad or good, it's just different. So why does this matter? For one, because women and men without kids are everywhere. Depending on when they were born, 1 of every 5 or 6 women over age 45 will never have children. That's double the ratio just 1 generation ago. Childlessness could double again as Gen X and millennial women consider their partnering options, the economics of raising a family, and the impact of population growth on our planet. As today's young women contemplate motherhood, who do they turn to with their questions if they're considering a path that doesn't include making babies? Or learn they might not have them because of infertility or lack of a viable partner? I wish I'd had older non-moms to confide in and seek guidance from. But after my then husband and I moved away from the city in which we met, first to the suburbs, then to a small rural community, I rarely met other women without children. When I did, I was unsure how to broach the subject without feeling like I was prying. If I spoke up and mothers were in the group, they'd quickly console me or point out all the kids I have in my life, nieces and nephews and my friends' kids, or talk about pets. That was all nice, but the women I wanted to hear from, the ones like me, mostly kept mum. And today we're talking. And so Jackie has gone into the more personal story, which we're going to get to hear about now.
Thanks, Kate. It's been really a fun process getting to know Kate. As you know, I heard about her book and we made contact, and her book came out probably about a year before mine, maybe 6 months.
Yeah, my big sister, yours is a few months younger than mine.
Yeah. But before I get started, I just want to thank Two Rivers Books and Jen in particular for making all of this happen, and thank all of you for being here. I see you out there. And thanks Susan Stone for reminding me that it's a camera, not a mirror. So you can actually see this actually as it should be. It's a mirror to me. Anyway, thanks. And I'm just going to talk a little, just very quickly about my book. Is a memoir that is a story about, I mean, it's about a lot of things. The thread that weaves through it, the main theme that everything else wraps around, is about childlessness. And being someone who was raised in a generation, in a family, a culture that where motherhood was elevated and expected. And I thought that would happen too. And then after what I consider a lot of research, I met the man that I wanted to spend my life with, Bill. And he didn't want to have children. And I married him thinking that would be just fine. And soon after our marriage, I began to question that, in part because I learned about my family's expectations and disappointment, particularly my mom's. And so I struggled with that and tried to sort out what was my own longing, what was of my body, what was of sort of these expectations that were outside of me. So I'm just going to read a little section from the book, chapter 27, Secrets and Calculations. And this is one of the things that I did for many, many years, was to take birth control pills. And there was always this consideration of never really should I or shouldn't I, but occasionally I would pause and wonder what would happen if I didn't, what would happen if I got pregnant. It was though there were two parts of me, two separate women. The woman of my logic embraced common sense and plans and agreements. She took pleasure in her life, the freedoms, career, friends, the family already here, the exquisite moments. This woman said, "You have enough." This woman understood the struggles of mothering, the demands and self-sacrifice, the always being torn between work and child, self and child. This woman took in the love of other people's children and gave it back completely, joyfully. She said, if you have children of your own, you won't have the time or energy or love for these children already here. The woman of my body pushed against logic. The woman of my body leaned to the pull of history and family expectation. Leaned so far that her body yearned. This woman said, now, before it is too late. The yearning distilled into a singular desire that overwhelmed logic and common sense. I wanted to be pregnant, to be filled with baby and movement of baby, to have my breasts swell, belly grow, to feel the pressure and weight of carrying within. I wanted to run my hands over the taut skin that sheltered a soon-to-be child and know the pains of a baby pushing out. So I'm going to stop right there. There's more in the book. And Kate and I actually are going to have a little discussion here about our mutual books. And is it okay if I start off, Kate?
You bet.
And also, as we're going along, well, actually, I think we'll wait, won't we, to get questions, will we?
Unless you've got something that you want to make sure you don't forget, and then just put it up there. And Jen can take note of it, I think.
So one of the differences between my book and Kate's book is very personal, but it's also a much bigger picture. She interviewed many, many, many women, and her book is organized around, the idea of not having kids, how it impacts the full life cycle from, this time when, all of your friends are having children, from the effects on work, family. And so my question for you, Kate, is how did you decide, and what, the stuff about end of life, or how is it to be childless later in life? Mm-hmm. So my question for you, Kate, is how did you decide what topics to cover in this? Because it's very broad.
Well, no, thank you for that, Jackie. And this book was written to focus on the impact of not having kids. So I know it's highly likely that of the people who are with us tonight who don't have kids, about half thought they would and didn't, and the other half knew that they were not interested or were not going to have kids and didn't. So we tend to split about 50-50. But and there's a lot of information out there about the decision-making process, but was virtually nothing out there about, so now you know what the answer is and what happens with life then. And that's what I had a huge hunger for. Living in a rural area, everybody had kids. And so when I met that woman, who is now a very, very dear friend of mine, and we started getting the groups together, we pulled together, just started looking around, because it's hard to ask these questions, as I mentioned in the opening. But we got groups together, and we found that over the course of time, and we've been doing those for probably, it's 8 years now, I think, that the cares and the concerns are pretty darn universal. The impacts are on your friendships, on your family, on how work works for you, and then carrying it all the way through to religion, spirituality, our health, end of life planning, to what we leave behind when we die. What's our legacy? Because it's not the footsteps of children. And so what was interesting about that, when I realized that this is actually a rich topic, and I needed to write the book because it wasn't there, it was very convenient, because the narrative arc of the book, if you will, is the full lifespan. And so it's so fun. There's some of the reaction I've had is younger women sometimes will go, yeah, I really liked the first few chapters, but the other ones, they weren't that germane to me. So, man, and I love it when I hear that. And I hear sometimes the opposite. It's like, well, now you know that book is there. And when you need that resource, you'll have it. So it will grow with you as you go through this time period.
Yeah. So can I ask you, Kate, just one other question?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how Mother's Day fits into that whole, because this is one thing I know for me, that, here we are on the eve of Mother's Day weekend, which is going to be obviously a very different Mother's Day weekend than any of us have ever experienced. I'm sure people are wondering how to, missing their moms or their children right now. But that's something I think for people who are childless, we've experienced that difference of that sort all along. So I'm curious for you, what you learned about Mother's Day in this process as well. I'm throwing one of the sideways here.
Yeah, for me, it goes beyond the day. Although I will say that Mother's Day personally tends to be a day of reflection, and it also tends to be a day that, if it's a challenging day, whether I've had too much of the message of all those things that we're not. I just remind myself that it's just another day, and tomorrow it's going to be different. I have been surprised this time. I don't know how everybody else feels about it. I'm interested in hearing, but it seems like the hype is less. The advertisements are less, and it feels a little bit lighter, and I'm appreciating that. And it's something that underscores that we're all in this together, and the reinforcement of those of us who are different isn't there in as big of a way.
Yeah. I know Mother's Day also it can be a tough time for people whose mothers are gone, and I think that's a whole other aspect to it as well. The celebration of the mother, and for someone who's doesn't have that anymore.
Well, thank you for asking that.
Yeah.
And now your book has been out 7 months or so now.
Yes.
Remember you launched it at Powell's. That was great. I got to be there. What has the reaction been as you've been running around and promoting it and talking to different people?
It's been wonderful, and people. I think one of the things that has most I've been overwhelmed by the support of family and friends. People just who've encouraged me through the writing process, still being encouraging in this process and not getting tired of me. But it's been interesting to in the comments that I've gotten from people, both at book events, I've gotten some wonderfully personal notes from readers, emails, has been, and then I know I'm not supposed to do this, but as an author, but going on Goodreads and seeing the comments about my book, it's been really interesting to see how we put our stories onto whatever it is in our lives. And so I've had people who have been like, she was the one who changed her mind, so why is she complaining now? And on the other hand, her husband was an ass because he wouldn't let her have children. And then other people who understand sort of the in-between place and understand that the deeper story of my book is really about identity and the exploration about identity, that in being someone who's childless in a world where so much of the identity of women is wrapped around motherhood, particularly I think in my generation, although I still think it goes on, I've had to explore that a little bit differently. So I would say that, the responses have been really, really varied, but also engaged. Even the people who've had strong feelings one way or the other. I mean, that's what you want in a book, is for it to raise some feelings, or to have someone connect with it within themselves in some way. And I've had all of those experiences. So it's been really a great time. So yeah, I guess I'm going to ask you another question here. You interviewed all of these people. I want to know what was your process for weaving all of this together? How did you do that?
Okay, well, yeah, I interviewed women from their 20s up into their 90s, and it was really important to me to have that full span. And a lot of that ended up being self-serving, because I wanted to know, again, what was my whole life? What were some of the ways it might come out? And so what I did was I interviewed the women, and I usually did it in 2 separate times. I put out an information letter to them, and then I would talk to them usually on the phone, sometimes in person, in a more brief conversation, and gather demographic information, which was primarily to have that information, but also to put the person I was talking to at ease, because we don't talk very much about this. And so it was a way that we built understanding and rapport. And then I would ask them which topic areas were of most interest to them. And then we scheduled a longer conversation, usually went a little bit over an hour. So I had that body of information, and I can go into more detail about how that worked. And then I sat in looking at the chair right now, I would sit in the chair and go deep into the rabbit hole of research and find studies, which are really hard to come by, and follow whatever that was. And I would look at the statistical part. And I am not an academic by training. I'm an interviewer. I'm a human resources former person and a sheep raiser. So I had that body of information. So I had the facts, and I had certain subject matter, like on friendships. What are the elements that create friendships and make them work and make them have trouble? So I had that body of information. And then I, differently than you, Jackie, I did not want to be in this book. I wanted to be like the unseen narrator in the background. Mm-hmm. And some of my early readers gave me input that, no, what you're missing is you're missing the close in. You've got the people outside, you've got the research, but we need to get closer inside. Yeah. So I basically had 3 different kinds of responses. And there's something called a braided narrative, if you want to geek out on construction. And so what that does is I weave in and out all of those stories, all held together by the topic area. And so you bounce from one to another as a way of, you get a factoid, then you get a story, then you get a reaction, and it just weaves on through.
Were there particular people that you really connected with in that just really stand out to you? I mean, I know you're a connector, you do that with lots of people, but like...
Oh, thank you for asking that. There are, I mean, every time I read my book, which has been hundreds and thousands of times, I am renewed with the courage of these women to share their stories, that they entrusted me with their stories, and how at the surface the stories are and were. And so it was just like, oh, thank you so much for giving me a way to talk about this. And so I when I travel around to different parts of the country, I stay with people now who are in the book. I've seen a bunch of people that I had not met before in person, and it has been, I stayed in Manhattan with someone. Actually, she left and went to another place. I got to stay in her place. So it has been amazing, and I will not lose touch with these people for the rest of my life. Huge honor. Yeah. A huge honor. So that's the story of where mine came from. Can you talk a little bit, Jackie, about your process? Because your construction is so different, and yet there's some elements of it that ring similar.
Mm-hmm. I was let me think about this. I have a writing group. UV Zalko is one of the people who's here tonight. Hi, UV. And I brought in an essay that was I just wanted to speak to, I'm at this point in my mid-50s at the time. I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I made it through that. I seem to be okay, but there's this, there is this other thing that's happening, which is the fact that my peers, my sisters, and my friends were potentially going to become grandmothers. And what was that going to be like? There was this whole other layer. And then other people who, having different experiences with parenting and just, all of that. And so I just wanted to write to that. And as I wrote, I began to realize, this isn't just this story, and everything is so linked as it seems to be in life, that, why did I want to be with Bill? What was so important, significant, or special about him that he was the person that I wanted to be with more than having children? But where did the longing come from? How did you balance disappointment? Just all of these threads that went in and out that I didn't feel like I could separate it. And so these questions would come up with this essay, and I realized it needs to be something more than just, a shorter essay. So it became a book over several years.
It takes a while, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Hey, I'm wondering, we do have a couple questions. Should we have a look at these?
You and I are just like, I was thinking exactly the same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, let's hear what others are asking.
So UV asked, how do you wish more folks would approach the topic of life decisions, like whether or not to have kids with you? You know, one thing I'll say about this is that being on this side of it has really made me aware of where my impulse is to express my opinion about what someone else is doing in their life. Though I confess I can be quite opinionated and, or say how I think things should be. But it really, that I was talking with someone the other day about how powerful certain people's opinions can be in our lives. And my mother made one simple comment, simple to her, which later it turns out she forgot, which was she was disappointed that I wasn't going to have children and worried that I become a bitter, lonely old woman. Well, those words, got in my head and, knocked around in there, echoed. I think it's just so important that we really think about how significant we are to other people in terms of our opinions, and be very aware of how we speak them, unless we're invited in, maybe. So for me, I mean, part of it is I want people to tell me if they think I'm making a misstep in my life. I've always wanted that, but I also want them to examine where that view is coming from. And I think the choice to have kids isn't someone else's decision. And it's the one thing that it's really hard for anyone else. I could talk about my feelings of joy in not having children or longing and wanting children, but I have to speak about it as my own feelings, not about what I think you should do. I'm curious for you, Kate.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And the other thing, I think that there's a perception that it's a set in time, yes, no, whether it was voluntary or not, when in fact, I think it's something that, just like the decision to have a child, it kind of ebbs and flows, and it comes in different forms at different times, and as you're going through and how that all works out. I had the opportunity to go read one of my journals when I was in my mid-20s, and it was so beautiful. I was teaching swimming to kids at the time, and it referred to how I didn't think I would have children, or I was worried because I would love them too much, and that it might end up diluting the broad life that I could also see for myself. I have 3 younger sisters, so I kind of had a little bit of mothering already of them. And it's so interesting because I've circled back around to that idea now. Mm-hmm. And I think when we do this polarity of I'm childless, I don't have any kids and I wanted them, or I'm child free, it's like I didn't want them. It's really more of a nuanced continuum that we will flow back and forth throughout our lives, given in different circumstances.
And I think that it's that, Jody Day of Gateway Women, who I know you've worked with, she has this book called Living the Life Unexpected. And it's about, she works a lot with people who are childless. And she says that, and I don't remember exactly, but the hallway to childlessness has many doors, not just didn't want or couldn't have. Right. And that it's all of that ebb and flow. I think in the same way that many women I know who have children have experienced that same thing. Exactly. Times where they were so wrapped up in the joy of it, and times where they're thinking, looking at another person's life and thinking, oh, that looks pretty good over there.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I'm thinking about the continuum of how we're going through this whole COVID-19 thing. Is you say about, oh, the kids driving me crazy. Well, there are so many people that are just immersed with their kids right now that and so their experience of this is altogether different than I live alone, and to have no one. I mean, it is just fascinating. And to say, oh yes, those are the two experiences, like, no, there's a whole slew of experiences in the in-between, and even those experiences themselves change.
Just as our experience, I think everyone's experience during this stay at home has been, I think it changes every day.
Yeah.
Holly asked, have you ever been bingoed? I love this term, bingoed. That's a new one to me, Holly. The condescending response to saying you don't want kids. And how did you respond or learn to respond in a confident way? Well, do you want to start there, Kate, or do you want me to?
No, you can go ahead. I've got it. I've got bingoed in my book, so I can talk about that.
Okay. I think I responded differently over time. I mean, there were times where my own lack of clarity or my own longing, but mostly I think that I wanted to look like I knew what I was doing. So if anything,
Can I interrupt just for a second to explain what a bingo is? Because it's not an obvious term for it.
Okay, good.
I
mean, fine while you explain that.
Yeah, good. I needed it explained to me, and what it is, we've all had it on different things. It's like you're in a situation and something comes up, like, do you have kids? And when the answer is no, there's very predictable responses that come from parents, and the bingo part of that is to say, it's a bingo. I was expecting that. I got it, and now I'm going to have to deal with that. And and so that's what it is. And there's a whole list of them. I've got in my book a whole list of examples of them. Some things like, but you'd be such an amazing mother, which I was going through fertility stuff, and hear that. I was like, what? Really? Excuse me, I need to go cry in the restroom. Or how can you not have children? It's wrong not to have children. So
who's going to take care of you when you're old?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We all know it. And so if you have kids and you hear someone ask those questions, just listen, because there may be someone who will go, bingo.
Wow, how did I never know this, that there was an actual term for it? So yeah, one of the things for me when people have said to me, you would be an amazing mom, I said, you know what, I would. And that's why I have so many kids in my life, young people, kids, as they're all getting the benefits of that. That's when I've been feeling confident. There's been other times where I have felt and I talk about this in my book, that impulse to go to justification. I really love kids, lots of kids in my life. My husband was older when we met. He didn't, so, and all of it also wrapped up in protecting him, not wanting him to look like a bad guy, but also not wanting to make space for anyone to try to talk me into it. So it was very complicated. And I think mostly one of the things I was always really appreciative of is that people would say, no, do you have kids? No.
Right.
And just leave it there.
So the title of my book, this is actually the 5th title. It took a really long time to get a title that hadn't been published, because 2 of them had while I was writing, or that actually captured what I wanted. And it's intended to be in your face so that it brings up the topic that we're not supposed to talk about. Because if we don't talk about it, how is anybody going to know anything about it? So I wrote all of my things. I wove all my stories together, and I came to the end of what I thought was the end of my book. It's like, okay, so what do I want people to do here? Well, I'm hoping that they're going to feel compelled to have conversations. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. It took me a really long time to figure out how to open tactfully the topic up for conversation, and how not to close the door. And so I added a whole section about how do we talk to each other, whether we are the person who asked the kid question and got the no. It's like, or the person who doesn't have kids, we know the answer before we get the question. So one of the things I like to say is that we have an opportunity to be prepared for how we want to take the conversation. And I put plenty of examples of ways to change the conversation, whether it's I need to get out of the conversation, or, oh, that's interesting you say that. Do you know other people that don't have kids? Because all of us do. And then you can have a conversation about having the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and I think there are so many different, the whole topic of motherhood or non-motherhood, all of it is, I think that we have a very narrow band of how we speak about it, and we romanticize it and we elevate it. And there's all this complication in between. There are people, who have children and have postpartum depression. That just, you just go through all of the things that the reality of being a parent comes with a lot of truths that we don't always get to speak about. And the reality of being a non-parent then is this whole other topic that doesn't really ever get, because I think what I always found was that people were afraid to either, like, I don't want to ask because I'm afraid that it's a sensitive topic, or I don't want to ask because I don't want to know that she doesn't like kids.
Right.
And it's, again, there's so much more to it than that.
Right. Yeah. And we do have options. And the one thing that I would suggest to those of us who don't have kids is that when you get the question and you give the answer that you don't, if there's a way to practice not putting a but after that you don't have kids, and to put something else there instead, because the but is, I think, one of the ways that we get derailed from actually sharing some information about that. It's like, no, I don't have kids. In my case, I get to go, and I wrote a book about it. And so all of a sudden that makes it go off to the races. So feel free to just say, oh yeah, and I heard that from these women who wrote books about it. What do you think about that? To deflect it, to make it not as personally based, because unfortunately our culture turns the "do you have kids" question, it's like the weather, it's an icebreaker, and it is such a fraught question. It's a horrible question.
Because I have friends who have lost their child, and so there's the complication of that. There's just all kinds of things in it. I think it comes with sort of this expectation of the traditional path. I noticed that Christine said, I always say I love kids when I can return them. I do have a chapter in my book about that too, just that process of, getting to have the kids and, bundling them up and having a great time. And then also that sense of, there's this other part of my life that I really get to enjoy too.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I've come to recognize is that it's kind of like if you have kids of your own, you have a laser beam to those few children, the 1, 2, 3, however many there are. And that is the focus, and their constellation of friends. Whereas when you don't have children, we can be, I like to characterize that I'm like an inch deep and a mile wide. And I know that I am making important impacts in the lives of young people all the time. I mean, I spent some time today with a young man who's going through some employment challenges, and helping little kids learn how to read. They're never going to remember that I did that, or that I even existed. But it's in the world, and to say that we don't matter, that doesn't make any sense. And yet we have all these taboos that women, we cut ourselves into these little pieces of the larger pie. And I'm not sure if we have any men on the call tonight, but we do that to ourselves. Like, do you have kids? Do you not? Okay, well, we're going to put a value judgment there. Oh, I didn't know this. If you have 1, you're not okay. If you have 4, you're definitely not okay. So then we cut it into a smaller, oh, did you want kids? Are you childless or are you child free? It's like, what are we doing? We all at one point didn't have children. So we all have some memories and some wishes and some dreams that some of us fulfilled, some of us didn't. We fulfill them in different ways. None of us ends up with a whole of everything that we may have wanted, or that we learn we have and we don't really love it anymore. My God, the people who are mothers and they don't like being mothers, all of a sudden, I'm a safe place for women to share that with me. And it blows my mind. Had they done that when I was younger, it would have been very, very painful. But now it's like, okay, you have your experience and I'm glad that you get to be real.
Yeah, yeah. I know that there are some of the people who are here who are younger people who don't have children or don't yet have children. I really don't know what the circumstances are, but I will say it seems to me in some ways from the outside that the younger generation is making room to make the decision to not have children. I think there are all kinds of reasons for that right now, and some people are making the decision because financially it doesn't seem as realistic to have children, or worried about the future. I mean, I think there are all these things, but I'm, if anyone wants to comment or, say anything, you're welcome to do that. I'm not sure. We are running up on 7:30. I know we got a late start, but I'm not sure what the protocol on that is, because I know our people who came here came with a plan to be done at 7:30.
Yeah, should we get a check-in with our bosses here?
Oh, here's someone. I said, I like to say thankfully no, or no, it was the best decision I ever made. I like that. See, I love it. I love it when there are people who are just like so bold and clear about, thankfully no, I don't have kids, or it was the best decision. I really love that. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, and that's a powerful place to be, because when you have a response, regardless of what the response is, that's a true response. You already know that the person that you're talking to is not expecting that answer. They're expecting the answer to be yes. So you own that time and you own the direction that the conversation goes. And that's what I had a blast doing, is figuring out how do we then move the conversation away that we wanted to go. So,
yeah. So a couple of things. I mean, I think that is really, Holly, what Holly says here about, that millennials are certainly more understanding. And I really think that's true. You just have a bigger group of people around you who aren't. I also, I still hear younger people say what Amy is saying here, that people are like, you think that now? And I've had a couple of younger people in my life, quite young women, who have had tubal ligations, and they're in their early 20s, and they are told even to this day, oh, you'll change your mind. Even their peers saying that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Yeah.
I wanted to pipe in a little bit about the conversations, because I think they are happening a lot more readily in the younger women and men are all over this topic. And the one thing I think that I would love to encourage younger people is to open the door to older people, because they have a completely different perspective and a longer view that is so rich, and they are right there ready to tell their stories. They just have never been asked, and they've been raised in such a way that they need a door open. They need a door open, and particularly if you're getting into the people in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s. Oh my gosh, they know. I mean, this is their lives. They know how it's all unfolded, and they love to share the information. I do. I love to talk about it.
And for the most part, we can say, you know what, it turns out okay. Yeah. The end of the story, well, I don't want to say it's the end, but this part of the story has turned out pretty well. One of the things that I really like about conversations like this is something that's happening over here on the chat, where what Stephanie shared about her responses helped someone else. And because I think that sometimes what I felt like is I'm disappointing people. And I think, some of us struggle with that, that there was a time where I felt like I was a disappointment. And that getting to hear someone else's response, like Stephanie's, which is best decision I ever made, is, and then someone else being able to say, oh, I think I'll use that. That's really helpful. So that's why the conversation is really important.
I was reading a study today that talks about women not having kids and do they change their mind? And it's yes, but there's a surprising number, a large amount, which if I had this study, because I didn't just read it today, it stays. There's some shifting, but there's a heck of a lot of continuity. And so to say that someone else is going to be able to influence you on how you ultimately come out, it's a little fruitless. And we had a comment by someone who had their tubes tied at 31, and we having a back and forth on that one. What a courageous thing to do, and I'm sure what a challenging thing to do. There's a woman, Therese Schechter, who is just on the final stages of doing a film about exactly that. And as I mean, right now there's so much material that's coming out, and I just want to make a few comments on some resources in that way. There's a film, To Kid or Not to Kid, by Maxine Trump, no relation. And there's also a PBS Independent Lens series about that. And so there is material, and it's good material that's coming out.
Yeah. I love this. Thank you, Parag and Carmel. We're perfectly happy with our decision to not have children. As I get older and all my peers have had children, even my closest friend my age surprised us last year by having a child. I've had that happen too, when you thought someone wasn't. And then all of a sudden like, oh, I'm the only one who does it. I find myself feeling excluded from them and even a little annoyed that nobody else felt as I do. Any thoughts? Yeah. That's, I mean, I think that speaks so much to the experience of, that sense of being other. And that, I know that I worked really hard to find my, kind of to pretend almost that I wasn't other, and rather than to embrace it. And I think part of it goes back to some of maybe even what Jen said here, being happy, stepping into that decision, embodying that decision, that I am a woman who made a decision not to have children, and I'm fully embracing it. And yes, it's complicated. There are times where I wonder, in the same way I wonder, what if I'd studied acting, or what if, there are all these other possibilities. There's so many possibilities for a life. And we settle in on one. And I think some of it is just saying, this is the path that I'm following, and I'm making peace, and also knowing that there's going to be a lot of texture to that decision. And putting around yourself, there are a lot of people around you who don't have children, or finding, sort of making that space for them. And then also for me, a lot of it was, I loved children, so I found a way to have that in my life without having children of my own. And so I got to have, the cuddling. I've held truly hundreds of babies and, fed them and changed their diapers. Although one of my nieces laughed at me because when she took her child back and went home, the diaper was on backward. Oh, well.
It caught it, right?
Somehow.
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me very much is getting to a certain age when all of a sudden my friends were starting to have grandchildren. And that caught me totally unawares. So what Carmela's saying, it's going to circle back around again. And so Jackie's comment about make sure you've got some friends who don't have kids, because it will circle around again. In some ways, with some people, it can be even more challenging than the first go around.
Yeah. And there are times, particularly for younger people, where it will feel like everyone around you is doing this and you are on your own. So creating places where you can have the conversations with open conversation with people who don't have children, and maybe some trusted friends who do, who will give you space for that. I'm aware that we're also kind of getting past the time that people sort of signed up for. So I want to make sure we look at kind of wrapping up here. Let's
Wow,
see
this
here.
is rich.
Yeah. My life for my, yeah, this is great. Yeah. I was always the one with the kids. It was so fun. Yeah. But the expectation that you do that, like, oh, go be with her. She doesn't get to have that. So, that was the thing. I didn't want the pity of that, or like, you've got to be, she's got to have her time with the kids because she doesn't get that otherwise. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have a whole nother session on pity and disdain and envy. That's a whole rich topic area in and of itself.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I think that we should probably just give it a wrap up so that people can go on with their evenings, and just thank you so much for everyone for coming in. I just love the comments. It is a topic that I think once you get going on it, there's so much to say. And so many people have so many different feelings about it. So I hope that you will go out on Mother's Day, for those of you who are parents, to have the sort of the awareness of there are people out there who are also not parents and are sorting through that. And that we celebrate motherhood, the sort of the mothering in all of us, whether, whoever we are, we have that capacity, and we mother in all these different ways.
That's beautifully said, Jackie. And I saw a billboard recently that said, "Thanks to the women who shaped us." And I thought, oh my goodness, I feel included in that message. And for those of you who haven't been to Two Rivers Bookstore, I just can't urge you enough, once we get to go be places, to go in there. And today, I mean, you guys will probably laugh, but I just realized, oh yeah, it's a bookstore and they have yarn. So it's like a pun. It's so clever. And it's just the most warm and welcoming and wonderful place. So thank you to Rivers and all of you for including us.
I want to say one thing real quickly. A couple people have asked about child-free recommendations. There are some really cool child-free groups. So, Holly mentioned on Reddit, but also on Facebook, there's a podcast called Child-Free Girls. There are several groups of people who are child-free that are speaking about this really openly and brilliantly. So I encourage you also to look at that. There are support groups for childless and support groups for child-free.
And there's also an excellent book that came out in June last year, Child Free by Choice by Amy Blackwell, who is Blackstone, excuse me. And she is a professor in Maine, and this is her area of study. So it's outstanding. So, see, there's so much. We just keep
going. Yeah. So go get books from Two Rivers, ours or anyone else's, and I think that anything we can do to support our independent bookstores, our indie publishers, Forest Avenue Press, and She Writes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you both so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us. This has been a fantastic conversation. It's been great.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks.